It's a pleasure to be here and to be invited. It's a really important event, and I'm also very happy that in Austria there's also a network of universities concerned about sustainability, and it's really a pleasure to see that in many countries we see these networks and sustainability awards or challenges, engaging a lot of young people, but also staff in reorienting higher education towards sustainability. So I used the Titanic metaphor because, you know, the Titanic is this kind of this big system that keeps on going, and you know, there's a lot of efforts that you might label maybe cosmetic, you know, where we're rearranging the furniture on the Titanic. Which is nice, and we could do a recycling program on the Titanic, but the ship is still going to that iceberg, although if we wait long enough, the iceberg might be gone. So it's anyway, so this is the outline, the wicked nature of sustainability. I think many of you already know about that, so I'll try to go fast there. Learning our way, learning and reflexivity as a key mechanism for changing the course of this ship towards another direction, the moral compass, which was already mentioned, the direction that we go is critical. Sustainability as learning, rather than in or for or about learning, to emphasize again reflexivity and the 5 domains that I think are critical in sustainability as learning, or sustainability learning perhaps, and then learning in and for transitions, which is such a hot topic nowadays, transitions and transition management. So changing not just the system, but being systemic in what we change, which is slightly different. And some closing suggestions. So just a typical question, or a wicked question you might say, as an example. If we want to feed, this is a statement just to see also where you are on this. If we want to feed the world in 2050, when there are probably 9 or more billion people on the planet, the use of genetically modified organisms is inevitable, GMO. Who in the room would say, yes, this is probably true? You raise your hand if you think we probably will need GMO food in order to feed the world in 2050. I don't see many hands. Probably the wrong audience to ask. Okay, well, this is a typical kind of wicked question, because some people will say, not necessary at all, we already produce enough food for 9 billion people. We just throw away too much. 1/3 of the food we produce, we throw away. So why bother with GMO? It's controversial and it's not necessary. Other might think, no, if we switch away from meat-based proteins towards alternative proteins, plant-based or insect-based proteins, then we can feed the world easily in a more sustainable way. Then there are those who believe in technology, who might think GMO is good, but they also think smart precision agriculture, to make it more efficient, using drones, for instance, that will feed the world. And then there are those who say, no, it's really about food equity and sovereignty, how we distribute food. 1 billion people are currently malnourished, poor nutrition, poor diets, and almost 2 billion are overweight. So we need to work on that, then we can feed the world. And then there are those who say, we need to develop food literacy in society, so that people make wiser choices about what they eat. Then we can feed the world. And then there are those who say, well, how about redesigning cities, so that we have vertical agriculture, community gardens, rooftop gardening, bringing the food more locally. And then it's not just about food, it's about the whole nexus, water, social cohesion, climate, bringing all those things together. That's a more radical transition perspective that requires that we engage urban areas in food. Another approach. So there is, I think, a lot that is already known about global systemic dysfunction. We do know a lot about loss of biodiversity. We do know a lot about climate change. We do know a lot about toxification, nanoplastics, microplastics in our bodies, in water, in soil, and so on. Yet it's still very difficult to change the direction of the Titanic, you could say. And in part it has to do also with coping mechanisms, you could say, where people try to find excuses to avoid having to change. A well-known phenomenon. We don't like dissonance and conflict. Whereas if you want to change your thinking, you need dissonance and conflict. And these kinds of responses are not atypical. You know, people are not so tempted to be precautionary. You know, as long as there's no evidence that is conclusive, I will not bother. And this is also typical. At first, you know, people might say, well, there is no proof, or there's a little bit of lack of consistency in evidence that will be used to argue there's no clarity. As long as there's no clarity or complete certainty, I will not change. And the second way of responding might be, well, there's already so much damage done, it's too late anyway. I'm just going to continue to live my life and enjoy it while it lasts. The third one, the technological hope perspective. Maybe it will be hydrogen that will save us. And we just wait. Scientists will find good solutions. They have faith in science. And then maybe at the very end, when the Titanic is sinking, people might say, okay, I'll change my life. And then it's too late, which also was mentioned already. The urgency is increasing and time is shrinking, which is an interesting challenge, I think, also for democracy. I'll get to that in a minute. Part of the problem is also that there are interests in society that do not really want to change the direction of the Titanic because they have a lot of invested in that ship. They have a lot of resources that they own, commodities they want to trade, whether it's natural gas or oil. And they actually like the confusion and the doubt, and they might even create it so that the confusion will keep people from changing and they can prolong their business model. And that's good for them in the short term, but also in the long run, not very good for them. But they're not there yet. Some companies are getting there. A question like, do you believe in climate change is a normal question, which is strange, because it's happening, it's a fact. It's like asking, do you believe in photosynthesis? And if you look at photosynthesis, the history of photosynthesis is kind of interesting, because it takes some time to establish it as a field. Yeah? It takes about 100 years. And even today, you know, not so long ago, in June of 2018, the Imperial College London discovered a new type of photosynthesis that will require that we rewrite our basic textbooks. So it's still a kind of an evolving science, you could say, but it's a well-established, robust area. And climate science, you could say, well, even climate science goes back already 100 years. There's already scientific evidence or notes about climate change that go back well over 100 years ago. Even today, though, there are still people in certain parts of the world that even question photosynthesis. And there are a lot of people looking at these kinds of sites too. So we do live in this post-truth kind of era where there's doubt intentionally created sometimes, and where facts don't matter, and whoever is the loudest or the most clever, who can formulate something in tweets in a clever way so that it goes viral, gets the most attention. European Union is aware of this also, and they're actually starting some kind of campaign against fake news, and which has an interesting skill. They look at different kinds of fake news, from propaganda to satire and hoax, false information, fake stories that are fabricated, and then they look at impact from neutral, low, medium to high, and they look at the motivation behind it: money, politics, power, humor, fun, passion, or misinformation. It's kind of an interesting attempt to make this, to make people aware of this happening and to create this kind of literacy that can help people distinguish fact from myth. The other thing that I already mentioned is democracy. As we run out of time and as people start controlling media and are able to present and frame things in a way that are fabricated and can skew people in a particular way of thinking, we also lose that ability for democracy and to engage people in deeper decision making. So there is the risk of kind of a commodification of everything, even how we think, through big data, through being monitored all the time. Everything is kind of captured and traded, and it's worth whatever we decide or do. The cookies we accept every day on our computers is basically saying, you can know everything I do here, and you can use that information for when I visit next time. And it will use that information, and it will skew you in a particular direction. So in some ways it's predetermining your future, because in a subtle way you are directed in a particular direction that whoever wants you to go there is benefiting from. Commodification, it's not just of water, bottled water everywhere in the world, or in plastic bags, or air. Even air can be bought in China. You can buy canisters of oxygen that are put together by Vitality Air, a Canadian company. You can buy Lake Louise 2.1, which gives 150, you can breathe 150 times. And that does very well when there's code red in Beijing. They sell a lot of these cans, and the stock of Vitality Air will go up. But it's the same in our schools and universities, where students are becoming input, throughput, output. And we are also kind of measured in our performance in terms of how we do on our research output. They have all kinds of indexes for that. Our education scores from 0 to 5, you know, if you get lower than a 4.0 3 years in a row, you're in trouble. So you need to come up with something creative to get the scores up. It leads to a kind of culture of accountability, and not to a culture of reflexivity, which is a problem when we want to have deeper learning and reflexivity. This is a kind of for those of you who are in academia, I made this a few years ago. It's unscientific, intuitive, but I think people will recognize it. That, you know, here's the time from 92 till now. So the last 25 years, number of publications around the world is dramatically increasing. It's exponential growth. But if you look at the time to read and review, it's going way down. Nobody has time to read, either because it's not what they get points for, or because they're distracted by their cell phones or technologies, so they don't have time. They cannot read more than 2 or 3 pages, and then they are distracted. So everybody's writing in academia, nobody's reading. Everybody's writing for nobody, which is not sustainable at all. And that's what we spend our time doing. A question like, what's your H factor, is a normal question. I saw a poster in the hallway that some people are looking at the S factor of sustainability in publishing, which I would be interested to see what that actually means. But we also need to rethink the whole notion of producing papers as our main task. So we need to think about a few components in an integrated way. We need to look at, of course, at the way we frame things. That is very critical. How we emotionally connect with these kinds of issues, which could easily lead to despair and being overwhelmed. So how do we provide a kind of a pedagogy of hope and change? We need to look at more systems rather than individual behavior changes. We need to look at lifestyles. We need to look at the structures that make it easy or difficult to live sustainably. And in the end, we need to look in a more holistic way at how we change the world. Here's an example of framing that I always use. The plant bottle, Coca-Cola company. They produce a lot of these bottles around the world. And they package a lot of water. Dasani is one of their brands. And they re-engineered their bottles. And they called them plant bottles, up to 30% plant-based, 100% recyclable. It's very clever marketing because it sounds good. They changed the logo with a little leaf. And people who might not be so critical or literate about sustainability might think, oh, this is actually something you can throw away in the forest because something will grow there next year. It's a plant bottle. And up to 30% legally could also be 2% or 5%. And 100% recyclable sounds wonderful, but in reality about 2% is being recycled. So that's just the way things are framed. Even the SDGs, which I'm all for, but some things are framed in a particular way that you could kind of question. Number 8, decent work and economic growth. You know, why not decent work and circular economy? Which is the growth as a principle. You could wonder, maybe growth, this idea of continuous growth, maybe that's part of the problem, not the solution. So somehow, who got growth in there? It reminded me of the People Planet Profit. You remember 5-10 years ago, People Planet Profit. I always wondered, who put profit in there? It's people and planet, isn't it? And profit, okay. Even the economy, I think, is there to serve people and planet, and it's not the other way around. It's not people and planet serving the economy, which is kind of what is happening in education too. Education serving the economy and not people and planet. So we need to really think again about the direction and how we frame things. 21st century skills. You know, there are many definitions of this, but I found this one to be the most disturbing. You know, it is a very patriotic definition, our ability to compete as a nation and for states, regions and communities to attract growth industries and to create jobs demands a fresh approach to public education. Public education. We need to recognize that a 21st century education is the bedrock of competitiveness, the engine, not simply an input, the engine of the economy. So here we have people who also want creative people, entrepreneurial people, people who can problem solve, people who can change perspectives, put their minds in the minds of consumers. All these capacities that we talk about also when we talk about sustainable development. So it depends again, how do you use those capacities? With what, to what end? What do you strengthen? What do you weaken by using those capacities? And then there's of course the technology that is all around us. It's kind of an invasive technology that we cannot escape. Even in the poorest parts of the world, people have access to smartphones in a very easy way, but they don't have access to clean drinking water, which is kind of stunning. It was a UN goal in 2050 or 1950 to have clean drinking water for all by the year 2000 or something like that. And we still have close to 1 billion people without access to clean drinking water, but we do have wireless networks, 3, 4G technology, smartphones all across the world in the most remote places. And then there's also the upper right there, you have a picture of the Titanic. Then the people who are then drowning, they're not so worried about saving themselves even. They're thinking about maybe a lot of likes on Facebook when they capture the Titanic sinking. So they're more concerned about that than about even their own well-being. And as E.O. Wilson says, already long ago, 1998, That's already 20 years ago. We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. We have access to Google, the new authority of truth, Google, Wikipedia, where we find all this information. But to really think about these issues in a deeper way, understanding the environmental, economic, ecological, ethical aspects, social-cultural aspects, that requires more than Googling. That requires dialogue, interaction, experiencing things, and using all the senses, connecting with place. Another one about the moral compass from George Monbiot in The Guardian. There may be flowing water on Mars, but is there intelligent life on Earth? He says, we're looking for intelligent lives out there. Is there intelligent life in the universe? He's saying, is there intelligent life on Earth? If you look at what we're doing to this Earth, it's not very smart. And while we marvel at NASA's discoveries, we destroy our irreplaceable natural resources so we can buy pre-peeled bananas and smartphones for dogs. So, what do we put, especially at universities where we have supposedly the smartest people on the planet, how do we use that brain power? To what end? Can we channel it towards a different kind of value other than materialism, individualism, competition? Can we channel it towards solidarity, community, caring for the future, for other people, for ourselves also, but also other species? How can we kind of escape anthropocentrism that led to the Anthropocene? That's a very difficult challenge. So just to capture the first bit of the talk, we live in unusual times in that the issues that we are facing are highly complex and even wicked. There's no precedence. We have to deal with these nexus issues that are not just about food or climate or energy. They're about all these things, or economics and the way our system works. There's a lot of ambiguity, confusion, lack of trust in science and government that we need to deal with. And if we only publish in scientific journals that nobody reads, that trust is not going to increase. We need to bridge science and society in a more effective way. Then there's the hyperconnectivity, where everybody is connected, but in a somewhat shallow way. Okay. And then there are the dominant neoliberal economic forces that kind of make living unsustainable lifestyles easy, the default, and living sustainable lifestyles very difficult. So how do we reach a kind of tipping point where we are beginning to make living sustainably easy and natural, the new normal? And then we need a more reflexive society, because we do not have the answers to many of these questions, but we do know that we must continuously be looking for them. That there's always a better way to do things, but the ways that we come up with may not be the definite or the definite permanent way of doing things. What is sustainable today may turn out to be unsustainable tomorrow, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking for it. Okay, where are we? I'm going to move now to the learning bit. How do we learn our way out of unsustainability? One, I'm just going to continue to talk. Hopefully you are not... That's called adaptive capacity, I say. Or resilience. Or being stubborn, I don't know. But Kate Raworth, I think you've all seen, most of you will be familiar with her donut economy, where she's also talking about these ecological boundaries, the ceiling that we must learn to live within, and the social foundation that calls for equality, democracy, dialogue, participation, good health, political voice, peace and justice. Those are the foundations upon which to build a good life for all. So how to live in that space that the donut, the ring of the donut, is a question for all of us. And how can education make that possible. The SDGs are certainly a mechanism that is leading to some, maybe many, not sure yet, many governments, many universities, many schools in many parts of the world to kind of rethink the way they organize education, learning, policy making, governance, to come to a more holistic, integrative, systemic way of addressing sustainability issues. Not just for the global south, like the Millennium Development Goals, but for the whole world, also the global north. These SDGs play as much here as they play elsewhere, and they're interconnected. The issues that we're facing here are related to issues far away and vice versa. That's an old thing we've learned already in the 70s, I think, but that's becoming more and more accepted. Quality education, number 4, and number 17, partnerships, are a little bit different in a way. They are processes, they are mechanisms that can help realize all the other goals, which are more content-oriented. So I kind of look at 7 and 4 as in a different nature as the other 15, which you can roughly, and maybe you could say 16, governance, strong institutions is another one that connects with that too. But those are the ones that we tend to focus on most in our universities. Because universities need to build partnerships, and they are, of course, always engaged in education as well. So the different strategies, I think, that we need to bear in mind when we want to change. Some are very much focused on changing people's behavior, persuasive strategies, you could say, where we kind of know what is the right behavior and what should be done. There's agreement on that. Like litter and waste, we can work on that. We can have all kinds of campaigns and actions to keep people from doing that. Nudging is another one, to make things more attractive, to make it easier, to just tempt people to do something they normally don't do. You nudge them to change. Social marketing, another strategy. And these are all more instrumental ways of changing people without the deeper thoughts about the values underneath. And then there are also more interactive approaches, dialogical approaches, where people together come up with ideas, support each other, try to experiment, and co-create even entire communities and neighborhoods that are more sustainable, that are highly participatory, you could say. So we tend to look at, when we talk about transformation and transition, we tend to look at these more interactive and co-creative approaches, I think. And if we do that, and I use this cross, kind of a heuristic that I created a long time ago with a Canadian friend of mine, Bob Chickling, where we have two axes, the participation axis, where citizens on the left have very low input, and on the right they have very high input. And the goals, this the goal axis, the vertical axis, can be closed and predetermined by experts or by policymakers, or they can be open and emergent. As we figure it out, we reset our goals. As we learn, we adjust them, we change them. If you do that, you have the upper left, you could say, expert-driven sustainability, which is more instrumental, and at the lower right, society-driven sustainability. In the upper left, you could use that with more simple problems where we have some agreement about what needs to be done. There's not a lot of controversy about it. The lower right, we don't really know. We need to figure it out together. So a campaign in the Netherlands that wants people to separate plastics so that the plastics can be upcycled or recycled or maybe downcycled. They end up in your fleece. This is a campaign, the Plastic Hero campaign. That's kind of in the upper left. The goals are kind of clear. We want to separate plastics and re-enter it in the system in a good way. Social marketing fits there too. Nudging fits there too. Goes a little bit to the right. If you want schools to change what people eat in schools, snacks that they bring to school in Holland, or the school lunches to become more sustainable, you can make that a more participatory process involving parents, children, NGOs around the school, local government, and you can think together about what is a good way to make the food in our school healthier. So that becomes a little bit more interactive, but there is still that clear goal. We want a healthier diet for our children in our schools and contribute to a more sustainable food system. And in the lower right, the interactive co-creative approaches. You try to, from scratch, involve people in determining what are the goals, what is our vision, what are the things that we need to change to get to that vision, what's working with us, what's working against us, who are the stakeholders, how do we get them engaged. That's a very different setup, because from the beginning you have a general idea of what you want, co-creation, interaction, figuring it out together. So these are emancipatory ideas, but you don't know exactly what will happen. So in the upper left, there's a lot we know. We are quite sure about what needs to be done. We must act now. And in the lower right, there's a lot we don't know. We're not sure what to do. We need to do something, but we still have time to figure it out together. In an extreme case, you could get an eco-totalitarian regime in the upper left, as we can see in certain parts of the world, where overnight they can close coal-burning facilities, start wind parks, solar parks in China, for instance. It goes very fast, but there's not a lot of space for interaction and participation, and people may be dislocated, move to other places. But it can be very effective in making a change quickly. So it could ecologically actually be very sustainable, but maybe not socially. And in the lower right, it could be more grassroots. It could be leading to more socially engaged people, but it may not lead to the best ecological outcome. So there's a compromise. And if you look at the roles in the upper left, the people guiding are instructors, trainers, and in the lower right and in the upper right more coaches, and in the lower right are more facilitators, co-learners. They learn with the whole group, because they also need to figure it out, but they do know how to connect these people with stakeholders and to invite expertise and so on. They're brokering relationships. And the people in the system, the participants, are more passive in the upper left, and they're more active and empowered in the lower right, because it's their concern. They care. They're passionate about it. The motivation in the upper left tends to be from the outside. We need to get people to do something because it's for the best of society. But maybe they don't want it, but we must kind of get them there. And in the lower right, the motivation is much more from within, intrinsic. And the kind of knowledge that is used is usually marketing theory, understanding of what we know about toxic in rivers. It's kind of agreed upon universal knowledge, whereas in the lower right it's highly contextual. What a sustainable, localized food system is in Vienna is different from in Kampala, Uganda. So you need to be very sensitive to these contextual differences if you want to transition towards more sustainable local systems. So, sustainability as learning, and you have to warn me when I run out of time. 5 areas. Yeah, where am I?
Now it's half an hour.
Okay. So, and if you may interrupt me too, I guess. So if you think, well, I want to add something or I disagree, hopefully we have some time also afterwards. But these are the 5. We've done a bit of research on what are key features, characteristics, design principles of sustainability learning. And these keep coming back also in the literature. So it has to these 5 areas. I'll briefly touch upon each of these now. But here's the general view: values and ethics, diversity and dissonance, agency and transformative capacity, change and transitions of structures, boundary crossing and system thinking. And those together need to be done in sync, in synergy. So you cannot really separate them. You can distinguish them, but you cannot separate them. So that's something I think that we need to be mindful of. So the first area, change and transitions. I think it's good that people learn to see the difference between optimizing something that we have and transitioning. Optimizing is not really challenging the principles and the values that are underneath, but you're trying to make things more efficient, for instance. And transitioning has to do with the rethinking of the values underneath and the principles underneath, where you kind of accept that the current system is not working for the purposes that we have today, for the goals that we're pursuing today, for the problems that we're trying to address today. We need to rethink the whole system. So if you look at that, you can look at it also from a more technological perspective and a more societal, socio-economic, cultural perspective. So the optimizing would be incrementally changing things, fine-tuning, and the transitioning is more not so much doing the things we do better, but doing better things altogether. So there's a subtle but important difference. If you look again at the food I started with, food literacy, resource efficiency, reducing food waste, is not questioning the agricultural system that we have today. It's optimizing it, right? You can do it more technologically, optimizing it. Resource efficiency is one example of that, or more socioculturally, food literacy. But you try to say, okay, nothing wrong with massive industrial agriculture, we just need to make it more friendly. The pig stables in Holland that have 24,000 pigs, many of them, a lot of pigs, maybe not 20, well, it could be. They need to have good quality air. We need solar panels on the roof of the pig stables. They need toys, the pigs. They shouldn't be castrated. So we can really optimize that system. And we need to make closed cycles, use the manure, and have methane digesters. And we can make a wonderful, sustainable system. That's using the current principles and ways of thinking and optimizing it. The upper left would be a transition from a technological perspective. Genetically modified food is a technological transition, you could say. Closed cycle design is also highly technological, often. Vertical agriculture, substrate agriculture. So here these are technological innovations that can increase productivity. The lower right, you would put the food justice, the food sovereignty, food cultures, starting to eat insects, for instance. That's a radical shift in many parts of the world, not everywhere. And in the upper right, you get into these whole system redesigns, cradle-to-cradle, local food systems, where it's not just about food anymore, it's about the whole system. Ethics, go back to the pigs, for instance. How do we engage young people, and not just young people, adults, in ethical questions? On the left you see iAnimal, which is a 360 virtual reality tool that you can wear, Google glasses, and then you can walk through a pigsty, this big stable. From conception to slaughter, you walk through and you see how the animals live. And you can walk around, literally you can actually. And that gives you the experience of, in a way, being a pig. And that opens up all kinds of conversations. And you could say, well, is that pedagogically, educationally sound? Should we expose people to knowing that? Or is that maybe not right? And then people will say, well, they have the right to know what's in their food. All the labeling of food, there's lots of information people don't understand, but by law it has to be there. But if people want to know how pigs live, you're not allowed to know. So there's an issue there. That's one way to engage people in ethical questions, but there may be others. At least we shouldn't shy away from these kinds of questions. Then learning to make change. I think it's important that we not just teach or become aware of how complex and wicked these problems are, but we also learn to make change. You mentioned it also. Without that perspective of action, it can lead to apathy and feeling powerlessness. So we need to build in opportunities for young people to investigate, to monitor, to come up with interventions, to see the results, to reflect, to see how they can optimize and improve their intervention so that they get to experience the possibility of influencing themselves and others. And to move from this spiral of powerlessness, where we all kind of get depressed in the end, where we lose faith in humanity, to a spiral of empowerment, where there's the premise of possibility and where we believe in the goodness of humanity, and where we think that we can work together, and we do believe that democracy can develop and unfold, where we have faith in good outcomes. 5 minutes?
No, actually, if we want some discussion,
Okay.
would be good to stop now.
All right. All right, so I'll go very fast then. So the utilizing diversity, I think we all know that we learn more from people who think differently than from people who think the same way. And that conflict is the driver of change. So we need to cultivate change and invite diversity. This is from Lake Malawi, or not Lake Malawi, it's Lake Malambe in Malawi, where participatory village mapping was used to make an inventory of resources in the community. First it was done with the male participants, and then people thought this is kind of a disappointing result. And then they thought, oh, why aren't we involving the women? Which makes a lot of sense, of course. And then you get quite a richer result in much less time. Fifth area, systems thinking, boundary crossing. I think we're very good in higher education and education in general to reduce the world and to think in categories and boxes and disciplines, but we're not very good in seeing relations, in making connections, to seeing how the world unfolds holistically. So how can we build in opportunities to see connections? This is a way to do that in using a bag of tea and connecting that bag of tea in the middle to all kinds of processes that have to do with energy, that have to do with pollution of water, and so on. And you can connect all the SDGs to this picture, although you'll see there are some absences, like gender and poverty. How do you connect that to that bag of tea? And I think the question with the SDGs is not so much what SDGs connect with this issue. No, how does every SDG connect to this issue? Because there's always a connection. And if you don't see it, then we need to think about that. Why don't we see it? I'll skip the T-learning, but kind of the work underneath that. These are some of the recent doctoral students' theses that I worked with in the last couple of years from different parts of the world that all talk about transformative types of learning. And we talk about T-learning in the sense of transformative, transgressive, and I think that's something I do want to share. Transgressive learning is kind of new. It's kind of going against the grain. It's to develop disruptive capacity. The capacity to stir up a system so that the structures underneath can be changed. We talk a lot about adaptive capacity, that the world's changing and we must adapt continuously. But we need to ask the question, why is it that we always must run and adapt? What is forcing us and pushing us to always be on the run and to adapt? That requires that we disrupt those forces that push us to do that all the time. And that requires not just adaptive capacity, but also disruptive capacity, which we do not talk about much in education. I'll skip these. There's a lot of research going on now about how people learn in transitions. And I think we do need to do more work on that. How do people learn in transitions? What are tipping points that can accelerate that type of learning or throw it back? This is an example of a Dutch program trying to green early childhood school grounds, which is a kind of a transition of the whole system in the end. And this is kind of how we monitor trust, commitment, reframing, and reflexivity in these systems. So we get a better sense of how does it unfold. And these are some of the stories that you will find on the website transgressivelearning.org from these 9 countries where people work on disrupting systems that push them towards extinction, in the case of Colombia, intentional and indigenous communities, in the Bien Vivir. And I think what is really exciting today is that we see all kinds of niches in society in different parts that are all kind of moving towards a rethinking of how we see the economy, of how we see the relation between schools and universities and society, of how we see the relationships between different actors in society, of how we can transcend disciplinary thinking and to become more inclusive, and how we can become more responsible in what we do. So there are movements that are positive. It's easy to get negative and to be bogged down about what's happening, but I think there's also a lot, we need to also cherish and celebrate these pockets of maybe counter-hegemonic, against the grain development that are off the grid of neoliberal thinking and globalization, but that are very much connected with each other to make up kind of a movement where we look for different kinds of indicators that are hard to measure but very important. We're often too preoccupied with measuring, and not everything, as we know, not everything that counts can be measured. So you look at other things, other signs that show trust, commitment, social cohesion, that people develop empathy and compassion in these learning systems. And there are lots of tools available that can help develop these kinds of capacities. Even arts-based approaches are becoming more and more in swing. You already mentioned music as a new area for sustainability. Well, all these areas are engaging with this. And the sustainabilities that we need to develop, it only works in English, but there are about 4 categories that connect with these 5 learning areas that I presented earlier. And we'll share, if you're interested, we'll make the slides available. So a whole system approach, also for our universities. I just keep talking. It does require that we look critically at our curriculum. It requires that we look critically at professional development, capacity building of our teachers, the faculty, that we also look at the relationship between school, university, and society, the world of business, the world of governance, the world of NGOs. How do we connect with that? Also looking at our own practices. Do we live sustainably as an institution? Do we experiment with alternative energy, with local food, with mobility that is more sustainable? Does it mimic sustainability? Is it an experiment itself, so that the curriculum that we live is consistent with the curriculum that we teach? And it also requires rethinking the way how we teach. Social learning, transformative learning, collaborative learning. There are all kinds of alternative ways of teaching and learning that are far more consistent with sustainability than, say, transmissive learning. And of course, it does require leadership, visioning, and so on. And in the end, it looks like this, and all the SDGs, they're in there. You cannot escape them. So, these are some closing suggestions. I won't list them. You can read them later, because I see Heidi's getting very anxious here. So anyway, it's a pleasure to hopefully have some questions as well. I know I said in the beginning, Helga's summary is probably more helpful, but I hope you still got something out of this talk. And there's lots of, if you want to contact me or go to transformativelearning.nl, you'll find lots of resources that may be of use to you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's just